This episode of Distraction is sponsored by Landmark College in beautiful Putney, Vermont, offering bachelor's and associate programs, short-term and summer programs for students who learn differently. To schedule a campus visit or to learn more, visit lcdistraction.org.
I know your teachers mean well, but I have a feeling that you're smarter than all of them put together. And it's like, wow, what? You know, and I'd never heard anything like that before, but it stuck with me. And you know, I came into school the next day with a little bit of a different attitude. You know, I felt much better about myself.
How old were you when he said?
I was probably in 3rd or 4th grade.
Hi, this is Dr. Ned Hallowell. Thank you for joining me for another episode of Distraction. Today we are really fortunate to have children's author Dav Pilkey on the show. Chances are if you've got kids, you know who Dave is. He's best known as the creator of the Captain Underpants series. And he's just published his 6th book in the runaway hit graphic novel series Dogman. Dave was kind enough to join me at my New York office, so if the conversation sounds a little different, that's why. Like me, Dave has ADHD and dyslexia. I know you'll find his story remarkable. Tell me, you grew up where?
I grew up on the west side of Cleveland, Ohio, in the suburbs, and I went to a parochial school in 2nd grade, and everything before then was fine. But in 2nd grade, I started realizing that I wasn't reading as fast as everyone else. I couldn't keep up with everyone else, and my teacher did not like me. She was very angry and very aggressive towards me, and she was always saying that I was reading like a baby, writing like a baby, things like that.
She would say you're reading like a baby?
So what she would say, we don't write like babies in this classroom. You know, this was really tough, being the new kid in the class. And then my behavior was becoming an issue, so.
Did you feel ashamed?
Oh yeah. Really ashamed, as far as, especially with the reading, because I could not keep up with everyone else, and I felt dumb. You know, I hate saying that word, but I just felt like.
So you felt dumb and ashamed?
Yeah. And then
his teacher wouldn't let up. She didn't.
No. She was. You know, she would put me in the hallway because of I was acting up, you know, in class, and so she'd put me in the hallway. And
so what were you supposed to do in the hallway?
I was supposed to do like a workbook, like we had like a writing workbook or something that I wasn't getting it finished, and I think she thought perhaps that putting me out there I could focus.
So, your desk went out into the hallway?
I had one in the classroom and another one in the hallway. I found an extra desk and she put it in the hallway.
Was she a nun or was she?
No, it was a parochial school. She was just a regular lady, I think. I don't remember.
A nasty regular lady.
Yes, yeah, yes.
And she said, go sit in the hallway.
Yeah. I spent a lot of time out there, like every day, pretty much. I was out there all the time.
And how did you feel out there in the hallway?
Very alone, very isolated, disconnected from the rest of the kids in my class. So I would draw pictures, you know, to make them laugh. So when I got back in, you know, I wasn't the bad kid in the hall. I was the funny kid who could draw. And then eventually I was.
So you would draw pictures out there in the hall?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you had paper and pencil?
Yeah. I probably was supposed to be doing my workbook, but I was drawing to entertain the class.
What would you draw pictures of?
Well, I drew lots of animals. I liked animals, and I sometimes would draw my teacher, which probably didn't help with the.
Did you not flattering pictures of the teacher?
Non-flattering pictures of the teacher. Yeah, and so eventually I started making stories because I don't know. I had these characters that I came up with, and the natural progression is to start telling stories about them. So I would staple pieces of paper together and make comics, and that's where I started. Dogman actually came from there.
This is in 3rd grade?
Second. He was one of the very first characters I ever created, and Captain Underpants came from that as well.
In 2nd grade?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So the figure of Captain Underpants was born in 2nd grade?
He was, yeah. He didn't quite look like that. He looked more like Bert from Sesame Street, if you can imagine Bert with a cape and underwear.
But you dressed him in his underpants?
Yes, yeah. Actually, my teacher gave me the idea. She said underwear in class one time, and everyone laughed, and And so that reaction inspired me. I was like, wow, if you can get that kind of a reaction from just saying the word, imagine what you could do if you created a...
You actually put someone in there.
Yeah. It was a big hit. Everybody loved him. Yeah.
Did you feel you were being risque by doing that?
Yeah, naughty. Yeah, it was fun. Yeah.
So you're like 7 or 8 years old, and that you went through the whole second grade out in the hallway.
Yeah, and third and fourth and fifth.
In the hallway.
Yes, and also corporal punishment too is really. I had a very abusive principal who really abusive and physically abusive, and the teacher would paddle us too, but it was tough. It was really
How did the principal hit you?
Like you should never touch a child, I mean, just...
What would he do?
He would make you hold a chair, and he would hit you until you'd fall on the floor, and you'd be crying, and he'd, grab you and throw you against the chair and say, move your fingers or I'll break your finger. Things. It was horrible. It was.
And what did he hit you with?
He had a paddle, which he eventually broke on me.
Hitting your butt?
Yeah. I was sort of the hero of the school when he broke his paddle on me. That was my claim to fame.
You'd have to go to his office and he'd hit you with that?
He would do it in the hallway. But yeah, it was always in the hallway. Maybe it was in his office too. It happened often.
Often?
Yeah.
And the teachers would do that too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And nobody objected?
It was the 70s. That type of thing happened back in those days.
You didn't have to pull your pants down?
No.
But it was with a board?
Yeah.
And often, like...
Yeah. It was. I just remember it. I remember the teachers would do it, and it would really hurt. But when the principal did it, it's something different. It was really awful.
And would he say anything?
He would yell at you, and he would, I remember him saying, "Move your hands, or I'll break your fingers." He kept saying that. That was, so.
And this was through 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade?
Yeah.
Your father didn't object?
He didn't know how bad it was. I should say that when the paddle was broken, this was in 5th grade. The principal broke the paddle over me. I was sort of a legend in the school, and I came home from school, and I guess everybody had gone home and told their parents that had happened, and then the parents started calling my mom, and then when my parents found out what was really happening, they brought me in that evening to speak with the principal, and then they pulled me out of the school.
Did the principal apologize?
Sort of, yeah.
What a sadistic, horrible man.
Yeah, it was bad.
And that went on, so your whole elementary school was...
Yeah, 2nd through 5th grade.
Through 5th grade?
Yeah.
Did you have, like, nightmares?
Yeah. I think it's something that still haunts me. I recently saw a picture of him on the internet, and I almost threw up.
He's still alive?
Last time I saw, he was, yeah. Yeah, a few years ago, I saw a picture of him, and yeah.
Do you ever want to go back and...
No.
So you come out of 5th grade traumatized.
I suppose, yeah. I don't really know that I thought of it that way. I felt in a way responsible. I felt like it was my fault, because it was always me misbehaving, and then I would be punished, and so I felt. But it never really happened again up until in high school we got paddled, but it was never like it was when I was a kid. Never like when I was little. So
misbehaving meaning you would do what?
Laughing in class, making comics, doing things that I knew I wasn't supposed to be doing.
You get paddled for laughing.
Yeah, I mean, they were very strict. Yeah.
You get paddled for making comics. For being creative.
Yeah, they didn't see it that way.
No, obviously not, but
yeah,
that's just appalling.
Yeah.
This is the 1970s.
It was, yeah.
They pulled you out of that school, and where'd you go next?
To a different parochial school down the road. I mean, it was in the same city.
So
yes.
Another religious school down the street?
Yeah, it was a Baptist school. I went from Lutheran to Baptist.
How was that?
It was much better. I mean, we still had some teachers that were kind of weird, but and not, they weren't physically abusive.
But they were humiliating you?
Yeah, yeah. To punish us, they would make you stand with your arms out like that until you cried, like in the Frankenstein position.
Until you cried?
Yeah. Or until you had to go to a different class, whatever happened first. But I never cried.
You didn't?
No. That's
good for you.
Yeah. But I would cheat sometimes, like when he wasn't looking, I put my arms down. And the other kids, they wouldn't tell on you, so that worked out fine.
So this is 6th, 7th, 8th grade?
6th, and that was just 6th grade. And everything was actually fine in 7th grade. It was fine.
And meanwhile, you learned how to read?
I did, yeah. I had a lot of encouragement and love from my parents. And like I said, they didn't know what was happening in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. And once they found out, they took me out of the school.
And that's when your dad took you aside and said, you're probably smarter than all those teachers combined.
Actually, that was before that, because I was still getting in lots of trouble, lots of notes going home from the teachers and things. I got pulled out of chapel one day for, I drew a picture. There was a Bible story about some guy talking to his ass, and I forget the guy's name, but anyways, his ass was talking to him, and of course, ass means donkey, and then we all knew that, but it was hilarious because the pastor who was giving the sermon to a bunch of elementary schools kept saying ass, and we were just. And so I drew a picture of this guy with his ass was talking to him, and he got yanked out of chapel, and so my parents had to come in for a big conference, and I remember waiting up all night for my parents to come home because I was terrified that I love my mom and dad, I didn't want them to be upset with me, and they came home, and I was like, well, what happened? Is everything okay? And they're like, just go to bed. Who cares? They thought it was funny actually, but they
been talking to his ass.
Yeah, and so that's when my dad, I remember them sitting on my bed and they were talking to me, and that, it's not, don't worry about it. It's just.
So they were able to not take it too seriously.
Yeah, my parents, they're actually, because they knew I was getting discouraged from drawing and from making comics in school. So when I was at home, they actually encouraged me to make comics, and they would commission comics for me. Because I had a hard time completing things sometimes, and so they would ask me to make comics for them. And when I got my first book published, they gave me back all the comics I had made for them when I was little, and they saved them, and they were in pristine condition.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so.
But your ADD was not diagnosed back then.
It was called extreme hyperactivity. I remember hearing those words a lot. Extreme hyperactivity.
You weren't given any medication, or?
I remember the specialist said that I should drink coffee, and we were like confused by that, and he said that apparently it has an opposite effect on children. I don't know much about it, but I do remember the coffee thing. It was a big deal, like at breakfast time, my mom pouring me a cup of coffee, which was really weird, and I thought, wow, I'm Mr. Big Shot drinking coffee, and then I took one sip of it and like, it's horrible. And so then, my mom, she's like, okay, well, I'll add a little Hershey's syrup and some whipped cream and sprinkles. And by that time, I think the effect of the caffeine was more, I was all hopped up in sugar. So it didn't, I don't think it worked the way the specialist thought it would work.
Right. But by now you were able to read and write papers and be a good student?
Yeah, I could do those things.
And you didn't feel stupid any longer?
If I ever had to read in front of the class, I felt really very self-conscious, because even to this day I'm an incredibly slow reader. Even if I'm just reading by myself, it takes me forever to get through a book.
So you have dyslexia?
Yes. I was diagnosed with dyslexia as a child, and I was diagnosed with ADHD in my 20s. They didn't even have that term when I was a kid.
No. So we're the same. I have ADHD and dyslexia.
Oh.
Yeah, I've got them both.
My brother.
Yeah. Right, exactly. I wouldn't trade them for the world.
Oh, me too. Yeah. I feel like they're superpowers.
Good. Oh, good. So we're X-Men.
Yes, yeah.
You had to have the right training to bring out the good side.
Yeah, that's right.
You and I lucked into it. What I want to do is help people not have to luck into it and not get paddled along the way. So you graduate high school. Mm-hmm. You're still doing cartoons.
Yes.
And did you know that was going to be your calling? Did you know you had a super talent?
Well, I always got a lot of attention for my drawings, but it wasn't until I got to college. I had my freshman English teacher. She took me aside one day and she's like, you're a really good writer, and I see your notebooks are filled up with cartoons. Have you ever thought about writing children's books? And so I started writing my first book that day.
Where did you go to college?
Kent State University.
Yeah, that's in Ohio.
It's in Ohio, yeah.
So you had at last a good teacher.
Oh, I had some other good teachers along the way. They weren't all bad, but
so this teacher.
This teacher was very inspirational, though, and it ended up becoming my first published book.
Wow, and your first freshman year.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And what was that first published book?
It was called World War I. One was spelled W-O-N. It was about a couple animals on a different planet that got into an arms race and solved it peacefully.
And it was for children?
Yes.
Have all your books been for children?
Yes, they have, yeah.
How did you know that was your audience?
Well, I think it just made sense because I love to draw, and back at that time there weren't very many illustrated books for adults, and so I just kind of got into the groove. But I also started to reread a lot of children's books, things that I had read as a child, things that I really loved as a child, and I just sort of fell in love with that genre.
And so then you were how old? You were a freshman in college, so you were 18, 19?
Yeah, about around that.
Wow. And then, God, that must have been pretty heady to get a book published.
It was really nice. I won a contest. They used to have a contest for students between the ages of 6 and 19. They had different age categories, and so in my age category, I won. And the first prize was that you got your book published, and so that was my foot in the door, so to speak.
And at that point, did you say, okay, I'm going to be a writer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now you knew. You're not going to medical school. You're not going to be a fireman.
I found something that I really loved, and I felt like I was fairly good at it, and I wanted to improve. I wanted to be better. So
did you major in fine arts, or did you?
I started out with an English major, actually an art major at first, and then I dropped out of the art program and went into English, and I couldn't keep up with the reading. Yeah, that was too tough for me. So I was just about to go into education, but then I got my book accepted, and so I just got my 2-year degree, and I went on to be an author, visiting schools and selling books out of the trunk of my car.
Really?
Yeah. So.
Oh my goodness! But that takes a fair amount of, what's the word? You'd be able to walk in cold and try to sell a book.
Yeah. Well, that was what I wanted, and so I have terrible stage fright, but I knew I was going to have to, stand up in front of a, group of teachers and kids and give a speech and make everybody laugh, and so I had to get over it.
So how did you get over it? You just did it? I
just started doing it. Sometimes you just got to jump in the deep end and hope you don't drown, and that's what happened.
And people started buying World War I.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was enough for me to make a living and start working on other books.
Off of that book?
And the author fees.
And were you dreaming of more books at that time?
Oh yeah. I had very big dreams. I have so much respect for children's literature. There's so many great artists and writers that I admired so much.
Who were your models at that point?
Mostly James Marshall. You might be familiar with George and Martha, the two giant hippos.
Yes.
Yeah, and so he is a wonderful writer and illustrator. So funny and such a great artist, such a great cartoonist. And then Arnold Lobel. He did Frog and Toad Are Friends and many, many books, but also very gentle humor, beautiful writer, and a great illustrator.
So you had those models that you were looking toward.
Yeah.
Did you have any kind of a social life?
I did, yeah. I had a girlfriend, that I could see her on the weekends.
And then what was the next book?
Actually, a book by a child psychiatrist, or psychologist, I think, called Don't Pop Your Cork on Mondays. It was the children's anti-stress book, and so I illustrated that.
Oh, it was written by a child psychologist?
Yes, yeah. But still published through Landmark Editions.
Don't Pop Your Cork
on Mondays, yeah. And eventually he wrote a bunch of other books, one for every day of the week, and they offered me the gig to illustrate all the others, and I turned it down, which was it was a big moment for me because I had this opportunity, to keep going, and they wanted me to move to Kansas City and to work for them. They were going to give me benefits, and I could work there, And I said, no. And I remember I just got my phone turned off. I didn't have any money. And I was standing at a payphone in the rain and talking to my publisher. And he's like, why would you turn this down? And I said, well, I want to write my own books. And he said, well, how many books have you written lately? And I said, 3. And he said, and have you sent them to other publishers? And I said, yeah. And he said, have you gotten rejections? And I said, yeah. And he said, how many of them are going to be published? And I said, well, so far none. And he said, and you're turning this down? And I said, yeah. And he said, I have some news for you. I don't think you're going to make it in this field without my help.
Wow.
And the rain's pouring down and I broke. And I was like, okay, well, I have to try. And
Have you been back to say hello to him?
I did, yeah. In fact, I dedicated a book to him at one point. I dedicated, I think, the first Captain Underpants book to him.
So you're in the rain in a phone booth. You're turning down this sure money.
Yeah,
and you just take
sure
your phone
thing. Yeah.
Because you wanted to do it on your own. So what happens after you leave the rainy phone booth?
Well, I just kept sending the books out, and eventually I did find someone who took a chance on me.
What a difference! I mean, you're feeling horrible about yourself sitting out in the hallway, but you have the courage, temerity, brass cojones to say to the guy, "I'm going to do it on my own."
Yeah.
Where does that come from?
Oh, I was young,
A lot of people are young. And
well, I wasn't married and I didn't have kids,
Yeah.
So you can take chances when you're young. And I thought, if I don't do it now.
So when does Captain Underpants arrive?
That happened, I think, around 1996. I think when I brought it to Scholastic, and
where did he come from?
Captain Underpants was from my childhood.
So, but I mean, he'd been sitting in your drawer all along. From the second grade.
Yeah, well, he was just basically superhero when I was a kid, and so I knew I couldn't do a series based on a superhero who flew around in his underwear. I had to add more to it. So I decided to take my childhood. And a discouraged kid who didn't do well in school, somebody who had ADHD. I turned myself into 2 friends who accidentally create this superhero. They make comics, and so it was a little bit more autobiographical than it was when I was a child. And so Scholastic took a big chance on that, and it.
Well, it wasn't a big chance, was it? Because you were already established.
I was established at the time, but I think when they announced that they were going to be publishing a book called The Adventures of Captain Underpants, a lot of people were taken aback at that.
By the name Captain Underpants.
Yes, yeah, they're like, this is a children's book, right? There were some people who were very upset.
So Captain Underpants wasn't as bad as Captain Poop or something, but it was.
Yeah, I think a lot of people were not ready for that, but
it was a little too risque.
I think so, but I think it's just like people who just looked at the cover and saw the name. They didn't really quite read the story, because the story's not risque.
Not in the least.
Yeah, and so
and it makes every kid giggle.
Right,
just like it did back in.
Yeah, and unfortunately, when the kids saw it, they're like, "Oh, I want that."
I want that.
So it worked out.
And you'd had your ADD dealt with. Do you take medication for it?
No, I don't. I was offered medication, but I thought I would try to first I would try to manage it on my own.
Yeah, and that's been fine.
As long as I am consistent with things like exercise and diet and things like that, I do much better. Sometimes I'm not always consistent with that, and it comes back. I mean, not that it comes back, but it just if I'm not exercising and I don't eat right, I find that I have some more challenges, I think.
Yeah. So then Captain Underpants comes out and it explodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just 80 million copies.
I think that's it, yeah.
So you're up there with J.K. Rowling?
No, nowhere near J.K. Rowling. No, she's leagues ahead of me. But I know people who know her, so I'll say that. Yeah.
How do you feel about that? I mean, to have had such an incredible success.
Oh, I'm very grateful. Especially since I've been able to do things with the Captain Underpants series that I've always wanted to do. Like George and Harold, the 2 boys from Captain Underpants series, they've both been diagnosed with ADHD, and George's father sits them down and talks to them about it, and that that it can actually be a very good thing.
Yes.
And so they wear it like a badge of honor, you know, and that was something that I always wanted to do, you know, to try to dispel some of the myths about it.
And that's so wonderful, Dave. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do in my work, to have people feel proud of it.
Yeah.
You know, that if you manage it right, it's a great thing.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
What messages would you have to parents of kids who have ADHD and adults themselves who have ADHD? What kinds of advice might you have?
I don't know that I'm qualified to give advice.
You sure are. Sure are.
I think for myself, I think the things that have had the most profound influence on me is love, really. I've had so much love and support from my parents, and I think it all starts with that. And I think if you can find people who will support you and love you and hang out with them and let them help inspire you, I think people with ADHD, people with dyslexia, they can do anything. They can do anything. And that's one of the things. Even with Dogman, I have a character. He's a robot, and his name is ADHD. But it's the number 80 with a hyphen and then an HD. I forget. It stands for something. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's short for something. But I always, when I go on the road and I talk to children and parents now, and I do like a book tour, I always draw a picture of him, and as I'm drawing, I talk about him because I tell kids that, you remember how I said earlier I had ADHD, and I said, well, back when I was a kid, everyone used to think that was a bad thing, but now people are starting to discover that it can actually be a very good thing.
Tell us how it helps you with your work.
There's something called hyper-focusing. I'm sure you know what that is. And I'm not good at multitasking, but if there's something I'm interested in, I'm right there. And it's hard for me to break away from it. And so I think that kind of focus is what helps me to get a book done in 6 months. I almost never leave the story, as my wife will tell you. I'm not the best conversationalist, I think, when I'm really into it. But I think the hyper-focusing is a huge, huge thing for me.
Well, this has just been such a treat for me. I hope we can stay in touch.
Oh, I would love that, Dr. Hallowell. I would love that. So lovely to meet you. Thank you very much.
All right, well, that's our show for today. Dave's 6th book in the Dogman series, Dogman, Brawl of the Wild, is available now. You can learn more about Dave and all of his books at pilkey.com. He's an amazing man, Dav Pilkey. Really, in my book, a true hero. He's an extraordinary fellow, and I hope you got as much out of listening to him as I did. I think he's amazing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on my conversation with Dave or any other of our episodes. You can send an email to connect@distractionpodcast.com or call and leave us a message by dialing 844-55-CONNECT. That's 844-55-CONNECT. And please, if you haven't done so yet, take a few moments to complete our listener survey on distractionpodcast.com. Just click on the word survey in the upper right-hand corner of the home page. Distraction is produced by Collisions, the podcast division of CRN International. Collisions, podcast for curious people. Our producer is the incredibly talented and ebullient Sarah Gerton, and our audio engineers are the amazingly intelligent Roman Zeitlin and the perspicacious Chris Latham.